Wow.
I call meeting to order. 6:30. Start with the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge of Allegiance.
To the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Anything to add?
So right now,
Everything this week?
huh?
Did you get everything this week?
So. I'll second that then.
All in favor? Brian Leopold, I pronounced that right?
You did.
Yes, we'll have, Jack, if you could introduce Brian for us, please.
Okay, happy to. Are these speakers?
You just have to turn it on.
Start the electronic down button.
Slightly, will slip out? Better yet. Thank you. I think I know almost everybody in the room here, but for those who I haven't met, my name is Jack Reeds. I'm a resident here in town. I spoke to the selectmen a couple of months ago and suggested that we need to learn more about broadband, and they were kind enough to set up this meeting this evening. Running through Arundel is a high-speed superhighway, and most of us are really not very much aware of it. It's running right up Route 1 and runs right out through 111 as well. That superhighway is carrying gigabits worth of dollars throughout the world. It runs from Boston up north through Maine, up into Canada, and takes a right and goes on your seas to Europe. In fact, you may have seen $1.7 billion zip over to Iran in the last few days. If you were looking quick enough, I think it went by. At any rate,
You didn't go through Maine.
I got started in this about a year ago when I read about something called the three-ring binder. And Mr. Lippold is going to be kind enough to talk to us tonight about that and give us some insight and provide us with some thoughts about how we might take advantage of it here in Arundel. Mr. Lippold is the Vice President of Planning and Engineering, is that correct?
Well,
Development.
Yeah, I'm Director of Consulting for Broadband and Telecom.
Okay,
Sewell.
stand corrected, for Sewell, and was Vice President of Planning and Development for Fairpoint for a number of years, in not only Maine, but Vermont and New Hampshire as well. He has over 30 years of experience in this field in telecom, now in broadband, and I'd like to turn the microphone over to him.
All right. So we're, oh, we've got more folks just here in the last couple of minutes. Just a good spot.
Yeah, if you want, you can sit.
You would like to sit here?
No, I don't want
Go
to
ahead.
disturb.
No, go right ahead.
All right. So, yeah, I met Jack at a Connect Maine Authority meeting in Augusta a couple of months ago now, I think. Connect Maine Authority is a quasi-governmental agency that's tasked with expanding broadband and improving the broadband capability throughout Maine. So I attend their meetings and met Jack, and we've had a couple of discussions since. So I thought I'd come down and share my knowledge and better understand what your goals are here in Arundel for broadband. So before we jump into that, I know you have a council meeting that normally starts in a half hour and a planning meeting or what have you, but did everyone come because there's interest in broadband, or you have an issue with broadband, or?
Yes to both.
All right, so before we start, I'd like to hear from you, what's your interest? Why are you here and wanting to learn more about broadband? And
I want high-speed internet and I don't have it, but I'm told that I'm paid for it.
so what do you have?
I have Fairpoint
All right,
on their plan. I get about 1.6 and I'm told I get 15.
right, all right. Well, I'm gonna come back to that.
Same deal. I have Time Warner and I get about the same.
Really?
Yeah.
All right,
I'm just interested in broadband in general. I'm interested in what kind of opportunities you see might be available. I know it's an international thing. I work with it quite a bit. And I have Time Warner. I don't necessarily need the blazing speed, but the connectivity is good. I'm wondering what kind of opportunities you see that we might take advantage of here in Arundel.
all right.
What and how can it benefit the town? Dollars and cents wise.
I'm a resident, Time Warner subscriber. I don't like it when you have basically no choice. I'm not a fan of monopolies. I've got 30 years of experience in public finance in another state, so I've got a lot of familiarity with public-private partnerships and wanted to find out what was being proposed.
All right,
I'm here to see it from an economic standpoint, to see how we can develop a stronger business community, see how we can branch off of it.
all right.
Same, basically, but I'm also a business owner, and we don't really have any problems, I don't think, with ours. Up to speed, I think. You get what you pay for, don't you?
That's a key. Sam?
We've talked about this. I'm here because I want to know how we can make the future of our town better for our kids and for ourselves.
All right.
Resident, yeah, I mean, I have Time Warner, it's pretty good, but again, sort of other than Fairpoint, there's no real option. I mean, again, looking at broadband in the US, of course broadband is now a loaded term according to the FCC.
Right.
Probably most of us don't actually have broadband. And seeing what other countries pay, of course, we're a much more rural country than some other countries, but our speeds are much lower than, say, the rest of the world. And just like more choice. So interested to hear that there's a gigabit line that goes down Route 1. So.
All right.
I'm a member of the press, so I'm here.
Oh, all right.
I write to the village.
Careful what I say.
Yeah.
Why'd you come tonight to talk about
I'm
broadband?
also a member of the press.
Oh, all right.
Sorry.
So, interest on the part of the council?
Jack told us we have to be interested in.
And we pay attention to
Yeah, he's a convincing gentleman.
Pretty much, all the reasons that were, mentioned here. We'd like to see what the benefits it can bring to the town. We have a Route 1 area that, there's room for businesses there. And we're hoping that maybe something like this might help attract more businesses, but we want to see what the opportunities are.
All right.
Yeah.
Keith?
For me, it's just the economic development driver that it may enhance our community, how we can maybe partner with other private entities to enhance it for our residents, as well as perhaps potential businesses, as well as existing businesses that may need it instead of relocating. I know that a lot of, like in Rockport, for instance, they have a large film company there that stayed as a result of getting a large gigabit ability to communicate with other parts of the country, so that's exciting. I don't know what part Arundel can play in that, but I'm hoping that perhaps you give us some information tonight that will help us make the right decisions.
All right. Yes, sir.
One quick silly question. Is Time Warner like broadband, but maybe on a smaller version?
I'm gonna go into that.
Okay.
And
You pretty much got that.
these are all, I'm glad to hear all of these concerns and questions. It helps validate what I thought I was gonna talk about tonight, so that's good. I'm gonna sit down.
Good catch.
Yeah. So, I'm not going to solve your challenge tonight. What I'm hoping to do is to share some background and some knowledge, so that you can be better equipped to maybe go the next step, to figure out what your goals are going to be here at Arundel. But it's important, I think, for everyone to have a common set of understanding and knowledge of the broadband world out there, if you will. And I'm going to start by going back before broadband and before competition. And when, if you go back, I don't know if it's 100 years yet or not, but when the phone company first started stringing wires, they were granted a geography in which to operate their phone system. And I don't know what the original phone company was here, but for a long time that's been the predecessors to Fairpoint, Verizon, 9X, New England Telephone before that, and so forth. And when those networks were first set up, they had a monopoly area. Nobody else could come in and compete with them. And they had a requirement to serve all of the residents and businesses within that geography. And if you take that geography further and think of it as a state of Maine, not that Fairpoint has responsibility throughout the state. There are some independent telephone companies, but largely they're the Bell operating company, if you will, responsible for the state of Maine. And the state of Maine is a very, very rural state. I think it's is it the most rural state in the United States. And when it comes to networking, that creates difficulties because for a network to be profitable, you need density. The more subscribers per mile or per square mile, the lower the serving cost is for providing those services. So Maine's very, very challenged in that regard. And when you look at, we'll use Portland or even Biddeford as an example, those are dense, we'll call them metropolitan areas, and the ratepayers or the subscribers in those areas paid the same thing as the folks up in the county paid. But there was a lot more profit in Portland than there was up in the county. So the phone company used those profits from Portland and subsidized service in the county. So it was a universal or a postalized rate, if you will, but metropolitan areas subsidized rural areas. And business customers paid more than residential customers. So business customers subsidized residential, whether it was within a metropolitan area or especially in a rural area. You have all of these cross subsidies going on in the environment. There was also, the federal government instituted the Universal Service Fund. So those areas of the country, everyone paid in, everyone here pays in, but those areas of the country that needed more funds to provide service received those funds. So again, rural areas were subsidized by the federal government. So you had three forms of subsidy going on: federal USF, business subsidizing consumer, metropolitan subsidizing rural. And Arundel is a rural area, all right? Not nearly as rural as a lot of other areas of Maine, but still it's rural, and it was initially subsidized. The phone company also at that time was regulated under a regime referred to as rate of return, where it did, whatever it cost to provide the service, they were guaranteed a percentage profit. So if they needed to deploy more outside plant cabling or build more central offices or install more equipment, they did that, and they received a return on that investment through the regulators, through the Public Service Commission. So everything was all fine and good. And then in the 1950s, the cable systems started appearing. And that was okay because the cable TV companies were providing a product or a service that the phone companies didn't. So the cable TV companies strung their cable on the same telephone poles as the phone company. Cable companies provided cable TV, phone companies provided phone, but the cable TV companies didn't provide service universally. They only did it in downtown areas or in the outskirts where there was typically 20 homes per mile, which was sort of an average metric that they used to determine whether they could do it profitably or not. So that's why today you see a lot of areas of the country without cable TV service, and why the satellite TV services are prevalent in the rural areas. That was all, again, all fine and good until internet came along. And the phone company figured out how to offer access to internet service through the technology they refer to as DSL, or digital subscriber line. And the cable companies figured out, oh, we can do this on our plant too, and we're going to use cable modems. So now, to someone's point, there was competition for broadband or internet access, and that was great. That drove down some pricing, and those services were very lightly regulated, if regulated at all. Typically at a town level is where they're regulated through a franchising agreement. And in the 80s, we really saw the advent of competition, late 70s, early 80s, when MCI and Sprint got into the long distance business. And oh, by the way, long distance rates also subsidized local service. So you had that competition, all of this pricing all of a sudden started going down for long distance services, and that eliminated the opportunity for subsidies. The big long distance companies were competing just for business customers, and they drove the price down, and AT&T and the Bell system had to lower their price, and those subsidies started going away from business customers. And then some of the regional players got into the game, like a GWI or an Oxford Networks or an OTT Communications. They focused just on business customers and just in major metropolitan areas. And they drove the prices down further, and that pretty much made that whole business to consumer subsidy go away. And I think I've covered all the subsidies. So the world changed with competition. We lost how to subsidize rural areas, and those serving rural areas we're no longer incented to invest in the network, which is part of the problem that you're seeing with Fairpoint today, is there's no incentive for them to invest in that network, especially because of the presence of competition from the cable companies. And the cable companies, by the way, now offer telephone service. Fairpoint still doesn't offer cable TV service. So when you look at the market share, the cable company, where they serve, from a consumer standpoint, probably have greater than 70% market share. So they've taken 70% of the customers away from Fairpoint. Now, I used to work at Fairpoint. I'm not biased towards them, but whether it's Fairpoint or it's Verizon somewhere else, or it's AT&T or CenturyLink, no matter where they're at in the country, it's the same dynamics that are taking place. That makes it a challenge for a provider to profitably provide service in an area such as this, unless they're coming down the Route 1 corridor. From a business standpoint, they can pretty much provide whatever they want or need to. So it's important to understand that it isn't Time Warner's fault, it's not Fairpoint's fault, it's our fault. Because we all wanted competition, and we got it. Had there been more forethought, where they could have said, let's have competition in the densely populated areas that will support competition, and in the rural areas, we should maybe think about continuing to keep those as monopolies and regulate them as such, there may have been a different outcome. May have been a better outcome, but that genie is out of the bottle and you can't stuff it back in. So those days are gone. So what are towns to do? The example of Rockport, they ran into the same thing. And they came up with a solution. Let me back up a little bit. Let's talk about the three-ring binder. The three-ring binder is owned by a company called Maine Fiber Company. Maine Fiber Company was established as a result of Obama's American Recovery Act. There's another program called BTOP, which I can't remember off the top of my head what that stands for. But all this money went out to those who were willing to build high-speed fiber optic networks that would connect communities. Not necessarily to go into people's homes, but at least to connect all of the communities on, so they had access to alternatives instead of being totally reliant on the phone company or the cable companies. So here in Maine, they built, I think, an 11 or 1,200 mile network that goes all the way from the New Hampshire border up to Madawaska and Fort Kent and back down around. It hits every major town and city throughout Maine, mostly. There are some that got missed. Sanford was an example that got missed. But they built this large network that allowed other companies to then focus on the last mile or the local areas of the towns. That was the thought, was that if we build this network around the state, other companies will come in and build a network at your home. Well, that was a little bit naive in that, if you remember back, those rural areas have difficulty supporting one network, let alone a phone network and a cable network, and to have somebody else come in and build a third network, it's not sustainable. There's no way to make that work economically because you don't have the density, you're not going to have the market share. But nonetheless, this network is out there. Companies are using it, OTT Communications, GWI, Oxford. Time Warner's using it a little bit. I think maybe even Fairpoint might be using some segments of that network. But largely, it's being used by the big internet companies who are transiting traffic all over the world. And so if you think about it, Google, a Facebook, an Apple, a Netflix, they all lease fiber optic strands on that network to carry their traffic from Europe down into Boston and New York, or up into Montreal and Toronto. And Maine Fiber Company is profitable largely because of that kind of business on that network. But nonetheless, it's an asset that's there. It's very, very low cost for companies to use. It's not designed for consumers or individual businesses to use, but it's designed to foster competition. So that does run down Route 1 and along Route 111. So if you're a business along that route, you should have no difficulty getting high-speed internet for your business services. But what does that do from a consumer perspective? It's really reliant on somebody to either build another network or for Fairpoint and Time Warner to increase their speeds. But they've lost those, Fairpoint's lost those subsidies, and they are not going to do it on their own. So, let me stop there for just a minute and ask if there's any questions on that foundation. Good.
Time Warner's got to be using this main Optic network.
I think they're using it north of here, like maybe up in the county in some areas, but largely they have their own network.
Yeah, they put up their own.
So they're not even using it, I mean, they're not branching off of it.
Again, they may be using different pieces of it. I know they're using it in some places, but probably for less than 0.5% of their need. I mean, it's minor. It's
when you say that this network, and I'm assuming what we have here is a bunch of dark fibers on
right.
An optical network, but you say it's easier for businesses to access than individuals. Why is that?
Let me explain dark fiber. I should have brought a fiber cable with me, but dark fiber is a fiber optic strand within a cable that doesn't have any light going across it. It hasn't been activated. So it's dark. And other companies will lease that, and then they'll put their own optical and electronic equipment on both ends of that cable to put light across it so they can deliver services across it. And then if you're a business along Route 1, let's say the car dealership, can't remember the name of it, they may go to OTT Communications or Oxford and say, I want to buy service, or GWI, and GWI will then build a connection from their establishment into that cable and be able to provide service over it. So you have to have, you have to be spending enough to make it worthwhile for one of those other providers to invest into making that connection.
And the switches.
Pardon me?
The switches.
Yes.
As we were talking about the telephone system, how it's been not as active or anything else, where does this also play in the game of cell phones? Because cell phones have turned around and wiped out landlines.
That's another great, and I should have included that in the cell phone service has, again, eliminated revenue for the phone company. So Fairpoint has probably lost close to 50% of their landlines to people that have just disconnected and rely on their cell phone. I'm one of them. I don't have a landline.
Are you allowed to, produce a business with multiple, like, different businesses as one to utilize the service going out through one? Were you able to set up your own, can you set up your own community?
You could set up your own network and connect into the main fiber company, three-ring binder. You could set up your own business of offering internet service. Yes, you could. But if you do that, you need to be very conscious of the fact that you need some market share. Because there's a significant upfront investment and there's ongoing maintenance. So if you want to attach to these telephone poles, for each telephone pole, you're going to pay rent to make your attachment of about $15 per year for each pole. And before you even do that, you're probably going to spend $200–300 to apply for a license to attach to that pole and for them to move other attachers on that pole to make room for you. It's called make ready. That's a long process that you have to go through. So you have to pay all that up front to get the right to be on the pole, and then once you get on the pole, you pay rent to be on the pole. And if you do build your own network, then what you are also doing, and it sounds like I'm against building your own network, and in a lot of respects I am. There's other solutions. But if you build your own network and you start getting customers onto it, you're making the other providers less profitable. So yes, you're having competition. You're probably driving down pricing, which is good for the individual consumer or business, but you're making the other providers suffer economically to the point where maybe one of them is going to exit if it got too bad. So in the case of Sanford, where they've announced that they're going to build a network connecting 130 some businesses in the town or city of Sanford, that's all great. They're building that network, that fiber optic network. Most of the areas are already served by fiber. And what they will do is they'll lower the pricing, and the competition will respond to that lower pricing. And it's going to be a challenge for them to generate enough revenue on that network to make it sustainable without ongoing public subsidies. So you have to be very, very careful in that regard. It's not impossible, but you would want to make sure that you have everyone in your community on board to get onto that new network if you want it to survive, especially in an area that already has two other networks.
So what can be done with that three-ring binder?
It doesn't benefit you a great deal, except what it does provide competition along the corridors where it's running. So if there are businesses along those corridors, they can talk to any of these other providers and get pricing from them that hopefully will lower the costs. But they can get, anybody along those routes can get as much bandwidth as they want. They could get 10 gigabit if they wanted. Not that they would use it, but they could get that amount of bandwidth. And so you have that along those business corridors today.
Well, that kind of, the way I envision it, I'm on the planning board, so I look at these kind of things. But if we could tap into that on Route 1 and have a business park that had incredible internet access, gigabits of access, what kinds of businesses utilize that kind of volume? And what's the chance of attracting them to Arundel?
I'm not an economic development expert. I'm a networking expert. What kind of businesses use that kind of bandwidth? Healthcare is a big user of bandwidth and will become an increasingly large user of bandwidth. Schools, libraries, which, by the way, Maine has this Maine School and Library Network, which is nationwide one of the best school and not library networks there is, as far as the amount of bandwidth it delivers. It's very, very good, and the federal government pays for most of it. Other than healthcare, banking, you know,
Financial services, you have a big user, financial services, engineering firms, a lot of data needs to be moved up and down.
right. But largely, that's already available.
I'm just gonna say, I mean, we're not in northern Maine where there's not any of this high-speed internet available to us.
Right.
We have it. It's,
Now, so from a business standpoint, yes, you could have a business park to make sure it was wired to connect into the three-ring binder. And there's a number of companies that would be willing to do that. But they're not gonna build it and they will come. They're gonna wanna make sure that they're coming before they build it. So, but you would have no difficulty getting a provider to provide that capability today.
right.
And who are the providers that would do this?
So that would be
GWI?
GWI, Oxford Networks, another company called DSCI, OTT Communications, Fairpoint, and Time Warner.
You mentioned, could you talk about red zone and what's happening in that world?
Yeah, so that's more for consumer. So did I answer the question on businesses?
Well, yes, but not very optimistically.
Well,
Because we have internet access, we have pretty good bandwidth, like in Portland and the major cities. So the chances of us attracting a major business by offering that bandwidth are not very high, it seems to me.
yeah, I, as a town, I couldn't recommend that you do anything from a business perspective differently than what you're already doing from a broadband perspective, because it's already there and available. Now, you can impact businesses through consumers. So if you wanted to paint the picture that your town had a gigabit of bandwidth available to all residences in the town, that's attractive. For those who are working from home, telecommuters or home-based businesses, it's attractive from businesses that are call center based, maybe like an insurance company, Unum, Blue Cross Blue Shield, Aetna, all the ones that are up in Portland have a lot of home-based workers because there's good internet access. You could take that angle to help attract business or to stimulate people to move in from a residential perspective and grow in that respect. So there's some value there, but it's a small geography. And to build your own network to do that, you don't have the scale you need to make it profitable.
So would one of our approaches to consider would be to look at a larger grouping, perhaps Kennebunk, Support, and Arundel, or perhaps other areas of York County?
Well, it comes back to figuring out what is your goal, right? First of all, I think anytime you're going to study and try to come up with a solution, if you can have a larger geography, that's better, especially because you're defraying some common costs as part of that process. You could look at subsidizing an existing provider. Instead of building your own network, you could look at subsidizing Time Warner to have them increase the speeds on the network. It's interesting that there were some Time Warner users here that said that they weren't getting the speeds that they're paying for. Time Warner claims pretty much universally in Maine that they offer 50 megabit down and 5 up as their maximum. Now you have to be willing to pay that for that tier. And I know at my house in North Yarmouth, I've got 2 internet connections. One is a 50 meg and the other one's a 25 through Time Warner, and I get that kind of bandwidth. My company's paying for the 50 meg. But it's available. And in other areas of the country, Time Warner is upgrading those networks to go even faster. And the nature of their network architecture is such that it's much easier for them to do that than it is for Fairpoint to upgrade the speeds on their network. Yes, sir.
Okay. With this system, okay, you said it's already on Route 1,
Yes.
okay? Now, as it passes through the corridor, do they pay any rent to the towns? Like how the transmission lines of Central Maine Power or anything else? Or is this just considered public service? And to put it up and down the corridor?
Yeah, it's, they're paying rent to the owners of the poles, which be Fairpoint and Central Maine Power. They're not paying rent to the town, and it's considered for the public good, if you will, that they're there.
Now, question also along that lines, many times the poles have to be bought through CMP. Is CMP on the end of that too?
Yeah, they're
Making money off the poles.
Some poles are owned by CMP, some are owned by Fairpoint.
and many of them are jointly owned. So it depends, but whoever is the owner of the pole is collecting rent.
So, I'm sorry, this fiber optic cable is above ground?
Yes.
Yeah.
It's on the poles.
Yes.
Usually, unless it's in conduit.
It's like that big thing that goes like this down Route 1. Chip?
If you go
No,
down,
I understand what it is. And so there is no, there's nothing running up 95.
the Department of Transportation may have their own fiber along 95, I
But
don't.
nothing significant. But this isn't just Route 1, it's also 111.
Correct. Yeah, and in Maine, 98% of the network is above ground. We've got a little too much ledge to be.
I understand the geological challenges.
CMP has their own fiber as well. CMP runs their own fiber on the poles. So there's a whole lot of fiber. all
They're
over the
just
place.
sucking up another line to utilize of the many thousands and hundreds of thousands of lines that are in that group, correct?
Yeah, there's a lot of fibers.
There's a lot of fibers.
Yeah.
There's not thousands, but there's probably, in the Maine Fiber Company cable, there's probably 144 strands. And they're probably using less than 25% of that. The rest of it's sitting idle for future use.
So basically, anybody along Route 1 or Route 111 could get fiber optic, basically, or any provider.
Businesses, or even a residence, if they
Right,
live
the
in
residents, right, but you're saying like if there was any businesses that were off of, you know.
The further away you are, the more expensive it is to
It's just
connect to.
further to carry it out, it's
Yeah.
more expensive to bring it out to you.
But
It's
if
available.
you gotta get power, that's, say you're 1 or 2 lots off Route 1,
Mhm.
you're gonna have to pay
Pay-
CMP to put poles in for the power anyway.
Yeah,
I don't,
Well,
am I missing something?
You can do it wireless.
Well-
If I understand it correctly, if I have a business and I'm on 111 or Route 1, I'm golden. If I'm anywhere else in town, sucks to be me, because I'm a resident and I can't get decent service.
Oh,
You
no,
can't
yeah,
just
you
not
can't.
pay.
No, I can't. I can't get decent service.
No, with Time Warner.
I have fair.
So from a
and I can't get
consumer-
decent service.
From a consumer, residential perspective, there are some other options. There is some wireless service available. So whether it's AT&T or Verizon or
We can't, the only ones that I know of that I can get are Fairpoint and Time Warner. I can't get anybody else. Fairpoint has blocked GWI from coming down to my house. GWI told me so. I can't, they have residential service. When I lived in Sanford, I had GWI. They told me that Fairpoint has blocked them. I can't get them at my office or at my house.
Well, that's,
That's, you know,
I would be curious to understand what's going on there, but Fairpoint really can't block anybody.
yeah, I can only tell you what GWI told me.
Right.
How many years ago was that?
A year.
Okay.
So-
it's recent.
You do have availability through your smartphone.
That's expensive.
It's expensive. And there's another company called Red Zone Wireless that is setting up a wireless network for broadband only, using similar technology. They're doing that in Portland now and a number of other cities, and they claim that they're going to expand that throughout the state. But that's not gonna be, that might, you know, they'll give you 10 or 20 megabit data, but it's probably not gonna give you a 50 megabit connection.
I'd settle for 10.
So when you
Yeah, but
say
you can get to
broadband,
it.
would you define what you mean by broadband? It's a term that's not used a lot, but
Yeah.
how do you define it?
So, broadband is your connection to the internet, all right, your local connection. And broadband is defined differently depending on who is defining it.
Shouldn't the FCC
Well,
just
how do you
say it's
define
gotta be 30?
So, yeah, here in Maine, the Connect Maine Authority defines it as 10 megabit down and 10 megabit up is broadband. The FCC defines it as 25 meg down and 3 meg up, unless it is in the rural unserved areas where they're providing Fairpoint some funding, and there they're defining it as 10 meg down and 1 meg up. I define broadband as your local connection to the internet. That, and it really doesn't have an upper or lower limit, because that target is constantly moving. If it's gonna be high-speed broadband, I would say that it has to be at least 10 megabit down to qualify as high-speed, so that you can do whatever you wanna do at your home. So with 10 megabit, you can download Netflix, you can have a couple of other devices going on, and you should be fine. If you have a house full of teenagers, 10 meg may not work. You might need 25 meg. So from a residence standpoint, you do want a network that is capable. If you want to attract residences, you want to keep them here, you want to see the home values hold or go up, you want to have high-speed internet. You want high-speed broadband. So I'm very surprised about that the Fairpoint speeds are that low here and the Time Warner speeds are that low.
I think it might be, my Time Warner's fast.
Well,
I don't
have
just-
Time Warner.
Oh, I'm just saying.
My Time Warner depends on there are too many people on my node.
Right.
So, Wednesday afternoon at 3 o'clock, it's fine. Saturday night at 9, not so much.
Right.
The
So-
streaming.
Yeah,
Everybody's on, you're blocked.
What a lot of communities are doing is they're saying, okay, let's get a grip on this. Let's figure out what's really going on out there. Let's take an inventory of the assets that are out there today, whether it's through Fairpoint or Time Warner or wireless or some of these other business providers. Document all those assets and capabilities. survey the constituents, to have them provide their input, much like what you're doing here this evening, and have them perform a speed test that captures the actual speed that is coming out of that home, and identify where you do have good coverage and where you don't. And where you don't, we refer to those as gaps. But do a study to understand what it is that you have, what you don't have, and how that compares against what you want. And each community defines it differently. And then decide, okay, if we have gaps, which it sounds like you do, what's the solution? All right, and there can be any number of solutions. It could be that you go to, that you look at the Fairpoint network and say, okay, what has to be done to that network and how much does it cost to increase it to a 25/3? And you sit down with Fairpoint and you determine, do you want to throw some dollars in to help them reach that goal, all right? Again, remember when we talked about subsidies and how those all went away, and Fairpoint and Time Warner and the rest of them are private companies. They report to their shareholders, they're not regulated anymore. We may not like that, but that's the reality. Or you can go to a Time Warner and do the same thing. What does it take to increase the speeds universally? And you could go to a Red Zone Wireless and say, hey, if we put up 6 more towers here in town, could you give us full coverage and at what speed? Now, some folks may not like cell towers, but you have that whole issue to deal with. You could also look at building your own network, or combining with some adjacent towns to build a network, and overbuild what is out there. I just caution you that there's all kinds of horror stories out there of failures in that regard, or ones that continue to require government subsidy. And the other thing to remember is, if you build another network, your constituents are not going to be loyal just because that's a network that they helped build through their taxes. They're going to march with their wallet, all right? And Time Warner and Fairpoint are going to lower their rates if someone else overbuilds. That we see it time and time again, and a lot of folks, I do some consulting work for a firm in Burlington, Vermont that's trying to buy a fiber to the home network that is located in Burlington. Gigabit to the home, to every home in Burlington, or virtually every home. And a very high percentage of the users on that network are buying 5 megabit service. Because it's sufficient for their needs, or they can't afford the higher tier, or they just don't have, they don't have a need for it, they're satisfied. So consumers invariably are going to pick the lowest priced offering, and you'll read a lot that everyone's going to need a gigabit. Nobody uses a gigabit. My guess is there's probably not even a business here in town that uses 100 megabits, let alone a gigabit. We don't know what the future is going to hold. We are pretty certain that the demand is going to continue to increase. We don't know how quickly, probably quicker than we think, but how long will that take? Who knows? So those are some things to think about. My goal was just to share these realities in a sort of an unblemished manner. It sounds like you have an issue. I would investigate to determine what's the extent of the issue, where are the gaps, and try to solve those gaps first with the existing providers, because that's going to be your most economical solution. And failing that, then look at solving it yourself. And if you enter into one of those studies, some of the counties up north are looking at doing studies on a county-wide basis, because the per town cost is less if you do it on a county-wide basis. But for each individual town, the solution may be different, and each individual town may pursue a different avenue. So the study side, if you can aggregate, it's a good idea. From an implementation standpoint, you would want to look at individual town or partnering with others, but and on implementation, there's some benefit to scale. Other questions?
Well, thank you, Brian.
Well, thank you. Hopefully I answered some questions, and I know you may not have liked what you heard.
It's good to have knowledge.
But it answers the question, whether we like it or not, we got the answer.
Right, right. So, hopefully, Jack,
Well, I think there's good food for thought here, and Sam and I have talked a little bit about this, and would like to make some recommendations to the selectmen.
Before I'd like to just follow up on that. Before I do that, based on your experience with localities like ours, you talked about a pre-feasibility study, stage one study, or something like that. Roughly, what would that cost? Roughly, not a quotation now, just order of magnitude.
If you were to do an inventory of your existing assets, do a consumer survey, a business survey, and identify the gaps without coming up with the engineered solutions to those gaps, I'm going to say you would be in the $15,000 to $20,000 range.
Really?
Yes. What's the number of residents in?
4,000.
4,000 residents, how many homes do we have?
1,500, 1,600 residences, the last count that I recall.
Yeah,
And
that's
I don't know the number of businesses, couple hundred,
Couple hundred.
small, large to small.
How many businesses?
Couple hundred. Keeps changing.
Yeah, I would say in the, yeah,
15,000 is a working number.
yeah, I'd call it 15,000, and then if you wanted to move on to the next stage where you design solutions at a high level and put together the costs and operating models and so forth, then that's another, call it 30.
Okay, well, we're not there yet. So I guess the question would be, is it worthwhile for us as a community, as a town, to take that first step and find out what the issues are, what we have and what people want? Which I gather is but that's what that first stage is.
That's my recommendation is, before you get down a path, figure out the facts and where you really want to take this before you start working on a solution.
So I guess a suggestion to the board would be, is that something that we want to consider doing? And if so, in what manner will it be done? Can it be done in this year's budget?
So what we would do is we identify where these gaps are, essentially at the end of the day.
Yeah, that's what he's.
That's all.
That's right.
But right now, do we know whether, other than Rich, who else had a problem with gaps?
He's been a gap for a while. so-
It's more than understanding the gaps. It's surveying the residences, and through that process, you'd figure out what they want as well.
Yeah.
And what is their willingness? And then you would understand your existing assets, which you can use from an economic development perspective, from a marketing perspective. And then you would understand your gaps, yes, all right? It's more than just gaps.
You gotta be careful with the survey though and what they want. To the point that you mentioned earlier, you know, people say they want this, but what do they actually need?
What they need and what are they willing to pay for.
Well, and you can include that in a survey.
What would be the purpose of this survey? Is the idea that are we thinking in terms of just general public service that every American deserves fast internet? Or are we thinking about it in terms of economic development? Or both? I mean, I just, why would we spend this $15,000?
From my perspective, it would be both, but the biggest thing in my, would be the economic development. You know, what can we do to make the Route 1 corridor viable to bring businesses in? If it's already there, then, you know,
It's
why are
on
we
Route
spending
1
money?
corridor.
That seems to be the answer that we heard. We already have it on Route 1, we already have it on
Exactly.
111. So I'm honestly not sure that the issue is what can we do from a business point of view.
That's
I
why I asked the
think the
question.
issue is there something that can be done to help residents? Well, who knows? I could just live in a lousy neighborhood. You know, honestly, that could be the problem.
How come you don't
It
have
just-
Time Warner?
Huh?
How come you don't have Time Warner?
Because I have political problems with Time Warner.
Well, then, there you go, see?
You got it
So why not our problem?
Well, that's what I'm saying. It may very well.
Towns should pay for that.
It may very well be that I live in a bad neighborhood. I object to the fact that GWI will tell me that Fairpoint says that they block them from coming down the road. That's an issue that I can take up with GW. I know I could go to Time Warner and get cheaper internet service. I don't know if it would be any better.
Well, I'm a little ways up the road, my Time Warner's pretty good, so.
We have,
But I
we
got a
have,
gentleman back here who says he's not having that much luck with Time Warner either.
But
So
that's what
it-
the survey would do, would be not only to
Right.
in this community, in this room, but tell everybody, what do they want, what do they need, what are they willing to pay
now
for?
my Time Warner is fine, and I don't live that far. I
Can't we
don't
do
live from
like
there.
half of the study with no money out of pocket at all?
Yeah.
Couldn't we do the survey ourselves?
Survey ourselves.
Do Survey Monkey and ask
Survey
people to just respond
Um,
how you feel about it.
I'm not an expert in this, but I would wonder whether we would know the questions to ask.
Yeah. I mean, there are people in town who don't have Time Warner cable because their driveway is more than 200 feet long, and Time Warner cable wouldn't string a line down there, so they don't have a Time Warner cable unless they wanna go out and spend, you know, a few $1,000s to have Time Warner, you know, string the line. And I know that there are
Sure.
homes like that
It's
in Arundel.
250 feet,
Yeah,
because I needed 235.
yeah.
I think the question for the selectmen comes down to, you know, is it a public necessity or is it a luxury? Because if it's a necessity, you know, it makes sense to do a study and to look at it. But if it's more of a luxury or, you know, something that you can live without, then why should the town spend the money on it?
I'd rather spend money on
Well,
water.
the further question, John, is what's been discussed is whether that's an attraction for other people to come to this town.
Well, we
You've
don't
got-
need other people, what we need is businesses.
Well, I understand. But people operating businesses out of their homes, like,
I think,
explain, I mean, that could be an attraction.
I mean, people knocking on the doors at the town hall asking about the internet service, you know?
If you want to get into the question of internet service, I think someone, and I particularly, the question is, can we build a better town by attracting the kind of businesses that we want to have in our town and the people who come with those businesses? It's not going to be GE offices, it's going to be small businesses, it's going to be the kind of opportunities that require access to the technology and to the internet world that's growing so fast around us. The question is, do we want to take steps to find out whether that is what we can help build that would make a more economically viable future possible for our town and keep our taxes low?
But that's
Like any
already
book.
available for where we have businesses.
From what
Right, for
I,
where we want our businesses to grow, where we want our businesses to go, Route 1, Route 111,
Agreed.
it's already there,
No, it's
right?
I would have to say that
No.
the top more
Yes.
not.
problem with businesses would be power, sewer, water. Internet is available and it's running fast enough to, you know, I have two
I mean,
connections
you-
going
yeah.
into the building.
Yeah.
I have to have a fiber optic and I have a cable because I have to have a backup and no problems.
I mean,
No-
you've got two buildings, two very large businesses.
That have two connections,
Yeah.
two high-speed
What's-
broadband
what's your
connections.
business?
About Where's
Where's Motors and Arundel Ford?
She's the car dealer.
Yeah.
Good thing you say.
So who provides your fiber optic connection?
I got, I think Fairpoint is the Time Warner, you know, that brings it in. I know it's not their line, like you said. They provided it, right? They connected to it somehow. It's Fairpoint. Fairpoint and Time Warner, I have both.
Right.
We're actually using the Time Warner one. The Fairpoint one is just a backup, because we have to have a backup in case Time Warner ever goes down.
Right.
Which, they're not gonna go down unless we lose the power. And they're both gonna be down, so I don't know why I have to pay for two, but that's it.
Thank you, Brian.
Thank you.
Tracy, can we take just a short recess?
Yeah, about there is a-
I've never used it.